New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be getting to the heart of understanding your karma with my guest, Eddie Villamoria, who is a consultant engineer and has been project manager and head of design for major projects such as the Channel Tunnel. He is a trustee of the Scientific and Medical Network, advisor to the Galileo Commission of the network, a trustee and council member of the Francis Bacon Society, and was the education manager for the Theosophical Society in Australia. Eddie is author of Mirages in Western Science Resolved by Occult Science, The Snake and the Rope, and his 4-volume work, Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe and Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Eddie is joining us from Godalming, which is south of London. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Eddie. It's a joy to be back with you on New Thinking Aloud today.
Good evening, Emmy. Good evening from England. And on a bright sunny day. And what a lovely occasion it is to connect with you again. We've had 3 podcasts so far. And it's always a joy to speak with you again, because I really feel quite sincerely that I'm engaging with a resonant soul, someone who resonates, with my thinking, not agrees. Agreeing has nothing to do with it, but someone who's in sync with the subjects that we're talking about and the deeper level of our engagement. So thank you, Emmy.
Thank you so much for saying that, Eddie. I definitely feel in resonance with you as well, which is why I'm so grateful to have you back with us. And yes, I will link to those previous 3 conversations about your wonderful 4-volume work called Unfolding Consciousness, where we had 3 conversations about that. Today, we're going to be getting into the heart of karma and helping people begin to, or wherever they are on the path, understand more about their own karma. To get us started, what is karma?
I'm going to try and put the whole of the ocean into a small pond, so to speak. Now, actually, the origin of the world is quite simple, and everything springs from that. The origin is Kri, K-R-I, which just means to do, to make. So karma literally means to do or to make action. Now, I must emphasize, this is not just an Eastern doctrine. It is a Western doctrine and an Eastern. It's a universal doctrine, even though the East has given it far more emphasis and understanding and meaning. So being to do, to make action, it is therefore the ultimate law of the universe and man, and hence the source and the fountainhead of all other laws which exist. So as no cause remains without its effects, right down from a cosmic disturbance to a national event, to a human action, to the movement of your hand. So karma is the unseen and the unknown law which adjusts wisely and equitably It is self-actuating. It is not something that's imposed on us, so to speak. If I jump from a height, gravity doesn't impose itself on me. I'm part of that system. So it's a self-actuating law. Even though unknowable, its actions are very perceivable. In that sense, it affects the cosmos, it affects our planet, it affects nations, it affects all of us. So even though there is, of course, individual karma, that lies within the national karma, the family karma, and the national karma, and the world planetary karma. So it's the great adjuster, if you like. And I cannot emphasize too strongly, it has nothing to do with punishment. That's why karma has been known, in various sort of ways as the law of creative recompense, the law of self-responsibility, the law of self-actualization. These are all words used to describe its basic action of always adjusting causes to effects. But the important thing from a personal point of view is not to get too hung up on the effects, but really to think about the causes, because it's the causes that matter. You can't do anything about the effects, but you can do something about the causes.
Okay. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, by that I mean, let's draw on some science just for by way of an allegory, because that would help. If you think of Newton's second law of action and reaction, you can decide to act. The reaction you can't do anything about. It's part of the law. A more useful allegory in science is the chemical law known as Le Chatelier's principle, where very simply any chemical system in dynamic equilibrium, and everything is in equilibrium, if there is an external disturbing force, then the system will take on a new equilibrium position. And in a chemical system, it will either give out heat or it will take in heat in the process of adjusting to a new position. Now, we can't do anything about the new equilibrium position. We can do something about the disturbance that caused it in the first place. Now, stretching that analogy just a bit, the human being, the human body at the moment, is very much not just a chemical system, but a system in dynamic equilibrium. If there's an external force, like a COVID virus, then the human body will take on a new equilibrium position known as fever and generate a lot of heat, which is what fever is about, in order to counteract the disturbance that caused it in the first place. So by emphasizing causes, we can deal with our thoughts and what we put out into the world and to other people, but how they manifest is not of our choosing. They can manifest in all sorts of ways, in time and out of time sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important point, Emmy, is never to think when things are going rather hard or going through a rough patch, never to think of a sort of victim mentality.
Yes, it is easy to go there when we have experiences that feel that they're outside of our control. Maybe we're even born with some type of congenital condition. Maybe there's some type of perceived external outside force that is impacting us.
Yeah.
One can even get into a state of feeling helpless sometimes in those situations.
That is entirely understandable. And let me say first, I mentioned the ocean and the pond. not facetiously, because anyone who claims to know all about karma had better read a large book on humility and apply it. Because I remember when I was in Tenerife, I was having coffee in a hotel, and their swimming pool was just walled off. There was a concrete wall from the ocean. Now, the point is, the water in the ocean and the water in the swimming pool is the one water. But I could paddle in the swimming pool. There's no way I can paddle in the ocean. So what I'm saying is that my understanding of karma is only the paddling pool. And I've got to be perfectly honest and frank about it. There is the vast ocean that I do not know, and I'm not privileged to know. And one only knows the real operation of karma when one has risen above any circumstance that generates karma. So the real laws are divulged to the initiates because they have risen above that which has caused karma. We, in the paddling pool, are certainly entitled to talk about it in the same way as we don't have to be a professor of mathematics to teach primary school children arithmetic. We can do that. But we have to fully acknowledge our limits and our limitations.
On one hand, we need to work with and through our karma, and you're also suggesting rise above it?
Yes.
Because there are lessons that we learn through our karma.
Yes. By rise above it, I mean understand the lessons, and when one understands them, then one has dispensed with that download. Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing more to teach you. So when I said trying not to engage in victim mentality, and for goodness sake, who wouldn't understand someone who has a congenital defect or a ghastly family situation? But leaving those extreme circumstances, difficulties in life are for our growth, not in order to hold us back. So, for example, if my soul's journey were to be a healer, say I wanted to be a healer, well, how am I going to be a healer? I have to work through the physical body first as a doctor. Then I have to understand compassion as a nurse. Then I have to understand the higher principles of healing and spiritual healing. But it's no good just reading a book about it any more than you read a music score and can perform at a international piano festival. You have to apply it. So how am I going to understand compassion other than perhaps having a difficult child in my family? So the law is, so to speak, saying, okay, you want to be a healer, you want to heal the world, first, heal your own family. Because there's so much glib talk and ego talk. I want to be this and I want to set the world right. If you want to set the world right, set yourself right first and set your family right. So the difficult child in your family is not necessarily at all because you were once difficult. And this is where a one-to-one naive Newton's second law, so to speak, action and reaction, is a very naive interpretation. It's just an allegory. So that difficult child is a spur to engage or to bring out your compassion and also, let's face it, your patience. Mm-hmm. And also, let's never forget in science, we don't have action and reaction. We have what's known as the parallelogram of forces, that when there are all sorts of forces coming at you, the resultant action is along the resultant. So if you are in a boat and the river is flowing one way, but you have a cross current going the other way, the boat doesn't go at zigzag angles, it goes along the diagonal, the resultant. But we are now, in every circumstance of life, there is the resultant of all sorts of forces coming our way. There is the national karma, the family karma, our own health, all sorts of things. So the action, the reaction is the resultant of all of that coming together.
How do you suggest for those listening who may be wondering, what is my karma? How can they be more in the flow with their own karma and work with it, shall we say, versus
Right.
maybe being confused or resistant to it?
Well, if someone says, what is my karma? There is no way I could answer that any more than if I were a doctor and someone said, I've got a pain in my stomach, I couldn't answer that. I'd have to go into individual specific details.
Right.
But one can talk about basic principles. So, for example, it's much easier to talk about the general principles of how to bake bread using flour, yeast, sugar, butter, than to talk about the individual ingredients that go into a bagel or a croissant or a sourdough or anything like that. So in terms of recognizing one's individual karma, I would say in general principles, try and identify repeating patterns. Okay, I've had a difficult relationship, then I've had another difficult relationship, and then another one. What's the message there? But that message I can't answer. It has to be for you to see what's going on.
Some people might perceive that as relationships are difficult and I'm going to avoid them, which is what happens. And this is where people sometimes can avoid areas that might be beckoning them toward some type of growth.
You're absolutely right, Emmy. Absolutely. The message might be, this is not for me in this life. My time and energies are more for other things. It might well be that. Rather than keep repeating the same, pattern. On the other hand, those difficult relationships may well be, and who am I to say, individuals with whom one has to settle some scores as a result of unfinished business. One can only try and get a inkling of that in moments of deep reflection, meditation, and perhaps consulting a really good astrologer, not someone who calls himself or herself an astrologer, in order to see the overlying blueprint.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up astrology. I have to say, other than our own intuition and inner knowing, which is incredibly powerful and often under recognized and utilized by people, I think that astrology can really show us a roadmap of our life.
Yes.
Share a little more about that, please.
It is a roadmap, but it doesn't tell you which road to take. It is a blueprint. Because if it tells you which road to take, then it's purely deterministic and fatalistic, which is not at all the point. There is free will within boundaries. So it shows you the view from the top of the mountain. It shows you the various roads you can take. You decide what your goal is, and you take that road. And it also will say, well, if you take that road, you may, but there are more difficulties ahead. So one sees this, for example, in astrology, in the conjunction of planets and the angles between planets. So a very simplistic example would be, say, a conjunction of Mars, the expansive outgoing energies, with Saturn, that which contains. So if those two come together, you're driving your car, so to speak, with the accelerator and the brake at the same time. So if you see that planetary configuration, well, for a start, in health terms, you can certainly see a lot of nervous energy and nervous tension. But taking that further, you can understand when to use the expansive energies and when to hold it back, and to be aware of not to bring those two together.
That's a great example, and it makes me think about how you and I didn't choose to become an engineer. You didn't go into healthcare. So we were listening to our own interests, what appealed to us, and our own natural, maybe gifts, abilities, or inclinations.
Yes, we were following the path allocated to us, largely of our own choosing.
Right.
But healing is another form of engineering. It is not only, it is designing and putting right, so to speak, the human being at all levels. And engineering is dealing with the laws of nature on the physical plane, which, now you talk of healing, I'm glad you did. One of the greatest books on nursing, as you well know, is on Florence Nightingale, written by Barbara Dossi, who's the wife of the great consultant Larry Dossi at Dallas. Now, that is one of the greatest books, and Florence Nightingale combines science and spirituality, and she talks about the individual's capacity to rise above their infirmities. And this was a wonderful lady who was not talking from theory. For goodness sake, she was a nurse in the Crimean War. She knew what she was talking about. But she openly stated that the universe is regulated by scientific law, and the universe means us as well. Universe is regulated by scientific law, which has been created by a higher intelligence. And Florence Nightingale was a great statistician. Her statistical charts are quite incredible. She was able to see deeper into numbers than most, I would say, statisticians who were limited by statistics. She combined the spiritual and the physical. She said there's no point in praying for miracles. If there's cholera, you don't pray for miracles. If you've got raw sewage flowing into the River Thames, you clean up the river. You don't pray for miracles, you clean up the river. You only pray for miracles, and this is where your karma and grace comes in, when you've done everything that you can do to the best of your ability. Then you can pray for divine intervention. Absolutely right. But God helps those who help themselves. And karma is downloaded, the karma you want, when you've done your bit.
What are your beliefs about how our karma is created before we even come to this particular life incarnate? And karma also implies, to me anyway, that reincarnation is central to this. Yes. Because each lifetime we get an opportunity to, as some might say, work out our karma or live our karma, or however you would term that.
Yeah. But also, if people choose not to take reincarnation or rebirth on board, that is no reason not to look at karma. So karma does not demand that we accept reincarnation, but karma and rebirth are the wheel. And that wheel of rebirth and karma is far more powerful than the wheel of industry in any country. So your question was, how do we recognize our karma? Yes?
Yeah. So where does it begin?
Where does it begin? A long time ago. Firstly, let's recognize in broad terms the four aspects of karma. Firstly, there's Sanchita karma, which is the totality of one's karma. And that is part of your national karma and your family karma. Now, Sanchita karma is the totality. The karma for your life is known as Prarabdha karma, for your life. And that makes eminent sense because the whole of your karma can't be downloaded into one life any more than all the work you did in your one life can be downloaded into one weekend. Or your one weekend's work can be downloaded into 1 hour. So there is prarabdha karma for a lifetime, and that depends on all sorts of factors like unfinished business, the lessons to be learned, all that kind of thing. Then the other aspect of karma is known as kriyamana, which is the immediate karma from present causes. And it is worth emphasizing, Emmy, that most of karma is immediate. You don't have to go into reincarnation and sanchita. A lot of karma, most of it is immediate. So that's kriyamana. And the last is agami, which is the karma which is sent on for future lives. So there's sanchita, prarabdha, kriyamana, and agami. So those are the 4 types.
When you say immediate, you mean when we come into birth, the karma is immediate?
Yes, when we come into birth, but not necessarily, obviously, at birth.
Mm-hmm.
But that immediate, but during lifetime. So if one commits an act of such gross whatever, then the download is pretty immediate.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
In that sense, yeah.
We can see some examples in history of...
Oh, most certainly. Yeah.
Of people taking action and then having maybe going to get legal action involved, for example.
Yes.
Might be something.
We have to distinguish between karma and skandhas. Now, to use an analogy, karma is the general. Skandhas are the soldiers who follow what the general says. So the skandhas are the bundles, the groups of psychophysical attributes which collectively compose the set of personal qualities that are attached to the new individual at birth. So the skandhas are all our psychophysical attributes which are under the law of karma, under the command of the general. So upon death in any one life, these the seeds of these previously sown causes, which have not yet fully germinated, these seeds form the skandhas, which are then form the psychophysical attributes of the personality, which then have to be worked out. So skandhas, again, are the psychological seed impulses, I can only put it that way, the seed impulses that lie dormant until the appropriate stage for their awakening in another incarnation. So our quirks and our personalities and all that we have set up by our thoughts and actions are lying asleep, and we have to deal with them when we wake up. So that's karma at the more personal level, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But just coming back, Emmy, to, I said, I can paddle in the pool, but not in the ocean. When people say, why did the Jews suffer? Why did thousands of babies, why were they atomized in Hiroshima? I have no answer. To say it's your karma is the most brutal, insensitive, callous thing to say. I've got no answer to that. And I've got no answer to, I keep asking myself when I go for my daily walk, as I did today around the lake, why is it that the behavior of totalitarian dictators and their henchmen causes so many civilian deaths, so-called innocent people? I've got no answer. One can use one's left brain and conjecture, but it's only conjecture. So this is part of the vast ocean that I think we are not given privileged access until we have risen to a much higher level, at least myself. I'm sure there are others who have.
Yeah.
The best example is Ramana Maharshi, arguably the last of India's mighty line of rishis, that the saint of Arunachala. Now, why did he die of a painful cancer? The left brain would argue, such a pure soul, how can he get cancer? But the left brain isn't good enough. Sorry, go away, left brain. There's more to it than that. There's cancer, and cancer. That can be cancer from carcinogenic substances, yes. But there is also another reason for cancer. Could it be to get us to question these sort of things, to ask deeper questions? How can such suffering and such sanctity come together? I don't know. Cancer seems to be a fashionable way of dying for great people. Krishnamurti, I believe, died of cancer. Ramakrishna died of cancer. Ramana Maharshi. Why cancer? I have no idea. But that doesn't mean one shouldn't ask the question without grappling at left brain answers.
Yes, it's easy for someone to say to someone else, well, that's just your karma, or that's the way God intended it to be.
Rubbish, yeah, of course not. That's the way you might have intended it to be.
Mm-hmm. And then also you mentioned the different types of karma. So there's individual karma, collective or nations karmas.
Yes.
How do they intermingle if one does have an experience that seemed to have been caused by a group or, as you say, some other country or military?
Well, yes, they intermingle in no uncertain terms, and our thoughts and our behavior cannot but be conditioned by the mental atmosphere of humanity at this moment. But that doesn't mean we take on board, well, we take on board the best aspects of the mental atmosphere, not the lowest aspects of it.
When you mentioned the definition of karma and how it has to do with action, it makes me think of Buddhist philosophy and the term right action. How is that connected to karma? Because when people go through challenging times or fall into great loss or depression, it's easy just to say, I don't really care, or become apathetic, and then to not try.
Yeah, Buddhist philosophy is one of the greatest. One has the Ten Commandments, of course, but the equally great and in some senses more accessible is the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Four Noble Truths are: suffering is a fact of life, but there is a reason for suffering. There is cessation of suffering, and there's a way to stop that suffering, and the way to stop that suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. So that is part of the great philosophy of the Buddha, and it's so easy just to say it in 5 seconds, but really to understand it is, of course, many, many lifetimes' work. But even at any level, the Noble Eightfold Path talks about right motivation, right vision, right action, right speech. And why do we cause problems by, let's reverse it, instead of right motivation, by having not right motivation, by having not right speech, by having not right thoughts. So suffering is caused by negating the law, and it's a law of love, which is difficult for some people to understand why it has to be a law of love, because it's for your growth, not for your not to hold you back.
Mm-hmm.
And talking of love, don't we pay a terrible price by going against the law of love?
Mm.
If we contravene the law of love, I'm calling it the law of love, I think it's fair enough that we pay a price. One of my favorite quotes from the great Paul Brunton in his In Search of Secret Egypt, Night in the Pyramid, was the adept telling him, obviously telepathically, that the Creator loves all. The Creator loves all, but he, the Creator, has enacted laws such that when man looks upon man with hate, he is destroyed by his own iniquities. So there's no God destroying you. The law of love, when contravened by looking on others with hate, those iniquities will rebound on you. You've done it. But I would never say that to someone who's suffering now. That would be extremely callous. But in principle, that's why I say karma is, the heart of karma is love. And that wonderful saying from the Light of Asia, that, how does it start? That the beggar at the temple door may be reborn a king for worthy deeds and merit won, but he who rules a king may wander the earth in rags for deeds done and undone. And given the fact that, if I may say so, there's an election going on in America, that wonderful saying needs to be understood. He who is the almighty president, we're not talking politics, for deeds done and undone may wander the earth in rags. But if the deeds are done meritoriously, of course you won't.
Thank you for bringing up love, because it does seem to be the way or one of the ways we are all interconnected.
Most certainly. And again, talking of scientific allegories, never to be pushed too far, surely quantum entanglement has shown scientifically, clinically, the entanglement between all particles anywhere. So if we are quantum entanglement in scientific terms, well, entanglement, coming together, gravity is an aspect of love. So we are interconnected at the deepest level.
Yeah, that might explain how people say, we fall in love, or I fell in love.
Yes.
You and I both have used the phrase work out karma. What do you mean by that? What are we working out? And once we do that, where will we be?
Well, we're working out in the same way as we fashion a rough diamond into a polished jewel. We keep polishing it. We're working out what has been given to us. So if my heart's desire has been nursing and healing, we are constantly working on that level and taking it to its highest possibilities for this particular life, and handing it over to others who will follow on.
Beautiful. Then might we return and become an engineer in another lifetime?
Why not? But what are we engineering?
Yeah.
Is the point, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I told you earlier before we connected that I was at the one of the most international music competitions, and the scale of the level and caliber of piano playing was utterly phenomenal. Now, you can't say that centuries ago they were practicing the piano, therefore they're better now. No. but their sensitivity to music, perhaps they were yogis who so refined the physical body that it was able to follow the inner command of the spirit. Also, they were not just yogis, they were great meditators who knew how to discipline emotion, because playing to an international jury on television with millions watching, it does play on the nerves. You've got to control your nerves. And how do you do that? So perhaps they had the yogic discipline, which they were then able to bring to bear on their particular artistic talent. It doesn't mean they were playing the piano centuries ago. But then why did they choose that instrument and not a violin?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe they did play the piano in a previous lifetime in addition to having been an advanced yogi. And so when they come into this lifetime at a young age, they are quite gifted or have a propensity toward it.
Well, yes. The words of Carl Czerny, Franz Liszt's teacher, are legion, that it seemed as though nature intended him to be a pianist. He didn't need to teach him anything, he sort of knew it. And with Ramanujan, the great mathematician, he was self-taught. When he wrote to Hardy at Cambridge, he introduced himself as a clerk in the Madras Port Trust, earning a salary of, I suppose, the equivalent nowadays of $100 a year, something like that. And he sent him, Hardy, the top mathematician at Cambridge, a whole load of mathematical formulae, and Hardy was astounded. Not from university. Where did he get it from? Well, he was deeply religious. So, yes, when things are so ripe, they sprout at the earliest age. And there's no way they can sprout unless you have sown the seeds.
Yes, and various inventors or people who have been leading, as you would say, science or even the arts or music forward can receive flashes of insight or experience knowledge through dreams.
Most certainly, the well-known example is Kekule, who saw the benzene ring in his dreams as eight worms forming a ring, and then he, in his dream, and then he discovered the octagonal structure of the benzene molecule. But dreams, most certainly, because in dreams, the higher self has far more opportunity to break through the personality, which is quiescent. Mm-hmm. But it won't do that unless you've asked it to do so by working on yourself first.
So the intention, the desire to become perhaps a better or the best version of yourself might help kick your karma into a really great gear.
The other very important point, Emmy, is when karma downloads, and this is absolutely vital. Now, for the confused mass of humanity, and that sounds very patronizing, to people who really just go about their everyday lives, very good, nice, honest people. Because their motive and action hasn't been sort of thought through and intended, the karma is pretty light, if at all. But the moment one decides consciously to put one's foot on the spiritual path, then certain effects ensue, and those effects are the downloading of a lot of karma that has to be cleared so that you can progress further. So once you consciously decide to put your foot on the spiritual path, it is you've asked the radiant light to search out your darkest corners. And it will search out your darkest corners, and everything that was in the twilight will now be brought into the full brilliant light. But that also applies to everything wonderful about you. So in other words, all your weaknesses are highly exacerbated and accentuated, and all your good points also. So if you were selfish and kept it down under a sort of mask of civility, that selfishness will break through. If you were compassionate and altruistic, that will be magnified 100-fold, because you have asked the divine witness to search out your inner self. And once you've asked that, you can no longer go back any more than an adult can go back and say, I want to be a child. Let's start again.
Yeah.
So that is very important. There are a lot of people talking of now, want to be spiritual, start a spiritual path and all that business. Yeah, do that. But be aware that if you consciously make that decision, you are asking, in many ways, you're asking for trouble. You are asking for trouble.
Right.
And that trouble is invariably on 3 levels: health, vocation, career, relationship.
Mm-hmm. Another way to say that is that we have challenges, can experience challenges that we need to overcome or learn from.
Yes, absolutely. Nicely put.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You put that in a more positive way.
Oh, no, just another way to look at it.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about fear and love in relationship to karma?
Well, what are we fearing is my first question.
The reason I brought it up is because some people say all there is fear and love. And if we think of the heart of karma is toward love of self, expression of, for example, the many ways we can express love through beauty, art, wisdom, philosophy, and so forth. And fear can trip people up, perhaps, toward their...
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, their karmic path, if you will.
Yes, I see what you're saying. That's a very good question to ask, Emmy. And if we see love in the sense regarded as the white light that illuminates the best in all of us, then the problem with light is it can cast a shadow. So if we stand in its way, we see the shadow, and if we identify with the shadow without realizing that the shadow was cast by the light, well, that is the fear.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Any new challenge, anything we take on, obviously can bring up some fear, which is only natural and the way it is. But fear can be is different from being fearful, I think.
And fear can sometimes serve a purpose as well. So it's maybe discerning.
It's certainly very protective. Yeah, in the right sense, yes, it can serve a protective, self-protective purpose, yeah.
Or maybe it can sometimes let us know that this is something to avoid for now.
Yes, definitely. Yes, it doesn't mean rushing in where angels fear to tread. That's the fear, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is the relationship between the ego and karma?
The ego is the servant. In this life, it is impossible to live without an ego. It's how we use the ego. The ego, in more esoteric terms, is the lower mind and the personal desires. So when that unit of the personal mind and the desires is so under the guardianship of the higher self, then the ego serves our higher nature. So, ironically, one has to have a powerful ego before we turn it around to serve the higher purpose. And here I can only think of Beethoven as the best example, who, as a young man with full hearing, a powerful man, when he wrote to a court official that words to the effect that damn your principles and virtues, power is the way of man and power is my way. So that was a strong ego talking. But then, as a result of his tremendous health problems, of which deafness was only one, he was able to look inwards, and he had to, and then the ego became the servant of the higher self.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a powerful ego. Nothing can be done without a powerful ego any more than the higher self, a chief executive, can do anything without strong managers and workers. But are the managers and workers working for the chief executive or doing their own thing? So when the ego blocks the light, then there is a lot of karmic download.
Mm-hmm.
But the word ego is what also is tied in with the mind principle. So then we see in the esoteric literature the spiritual ego, the higher ego, now spelt with a capital E. And this means the coming together of the intuition and the mind principle. Without mind, there is no ego.
Would you consider that to be like the higher self or connecting with the soul?
When you've connected with an ego with a capital E, you are most certainly, yes, you are joining the mind principle with the spiritual nature, with the intuition. So in Sanskrit, it's buddhi manas, which is the spiritual ego. It is the coming together of buddhi, which is the intuitional principle, which is an abstract term. It only can engage when it's joined up with mind, the higher mind, manas. But when the lower mind is joined with the desire, we call that kama manas, because then our thoughts are desire driven rather than driven by some higher impulse.
How do you suggest someone discern what is a desire that's in alignment with their karma to follow that versus a desire that might be a distraction or a pattern that is perhaps unhealthy, unnecessary, or could negatively impact the person or others around them?
One surefire way of distinguishing or discerning is, would I do this if I were not paid anything? In other words, am I doing this for recognition? Am I doing this for money? Now, of course, we have to earn a living. Come on, be sensible. But what is the motivation? Would I do this if money were no object? Now, without being too personal, I try and practice the piano every day, 2 hours a day. No one's paying me. I haven't won any prizes. Why am I doing it?
Because you love it.
Yeah, I love it. So there you are. So that's one small and rather simplistic example. So ask yourself, to what extent does money, fame, power, position, and control figure in what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I'm not saying we don't earn a living. We have to be sensible. And I think Manly Hall gives us the wonderful example of the sage Meletius discoursing with his disciple on the heavens and the stars, and he fell into a ditch and was full of mud and water. And the message is, you may discourse on the heavens and the higher principles as well, but don't forget your feet are also on the earth. So we do have to earn a living, but some people make it an obsession.
Right. And then that can impact a person's
Of course,
ethics and morals.
ethics, morals, ability or inability to tell the truth, all sorts of other things, yes.
As we're talking, it's clear to me that one needs to have, or it's necessary to have, a certain amount of self-reflection when engaging with your karma. So that self-awareness and your own consciousness needs to definitely
Yes.
be paying attention.
Yes, self-awareness is so important, Emmy, all the time. And the more we teach our children self-awareness, we will sow good karmic seeds for them. I've lost count of the number of times I can hear my mother, my parents saying, "Now, how would you like this if I did that to you? How would you like it if I spoke to you like that? Now, if you don't like it, don't do it to others."
Yeah.
Self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
The basics are so simple.
Yeah.
That's the irony. It's the golden rule. But the sooner we inculcate self-awareness, rather than at a young age teaching our children or giving them that ghastly thing known as iPhones.
They can serve a purpose, but yes, it's how one uses technology.
Not for children. You know, when they become teenagers and mummy and daddy are afraid about, well, you are not back at midnight, where are you?
Yeah.
But for children, fairy stories, trees, nature, mythology, vital.
Yes.
And dare I say, I had all of that. Mythology in full measure, fairy stories, Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables, and later on in school, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata.
Yes.
Yes, so I'm deeply grateful for that.
The golden rule is do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And that sounds like a beautiful karmic principle.
Or the silver rule, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. And also the third one, which Professor Scott Olson, who's a wonderful, wonderful theosophist and philosopher, he said, as far as possible, without compromising yourself, of course, the other person is generally right. But don't be naive about it, obviously.
Can you say more about that? How the other person is generally right?
Most people are not out to get you. If you ask someone on the road for help or anything, they're not out to get you. They're only out to get you if you wind them up or do something, you know, that angers them. But in general, the other person does not seek to harm you.
There are some people who do believe in external evil forces.
Oh, yes.
And I'd love to hear you comment on that. In addition to, and you've mentioned this earlier as well, political leaders in power and those who can be megomaniacal and who really do have their own interests at heart primarily, and those who they consort with, and people can feel that they are being impacted by those outside forces.
Yeah. They most certainly are external evil forces. Now, those forces range over a vast spectrum, and one of those would be elementals, which can invade our aura when we are drunk or even worse, taking drugs. But in general, in trying to provide something that could be helpful, there are 3 ways we can recognize, let's just call it an evil force. And I've thought about this a lot, Emmy. There's no such thing as an evil person or a loving person. Love and evil are abstract. Evil persons are a person who makes himself susceptible to an evil influence. And I'm not splitting hairs. And a loving person is a person who makes himself or herself receptive to love, which is a universal force and abstract. But you personalize it by drawing that in. But now, talking of evil forces, there are three well-known ways to recognize the influence of dark forces. The first is extreme brutality, easily recognized. The second is extreme sensuality, also easily recognized. The third is not so easily recognized. It is cunning. And that cunning takes the form of deviousness and charm, playing on another person's ego. Follow me, and your sex life, your riches, everything will be wonderful. So it's the intellectual cunning. And in these sort of people, intellect can develop to an enormous degree, but it's not intellect as such, it's the animal cunning. So it's the deviousness, and it's telling lies. And in volume 3, I mentioned Thomas Troward. I think few people have come across him now, but he was a very well-known judge in British India. And in his Edinburgh lectures, he said a lie is just about the worst crime, because a lie is saying something that is not. So the rebound from telling lies is going to be severe. Now, there are white lies, of course, and there are black lies. Every parent tells its child white lies. Now, look, your teddy bear wants to go to sleep. You should go to sleep now.
Mm-hmm. Or Santa Claus is going to determine if you're on the good or naughty list. Yeah.
But Santa Claus is very necessary to tell children. It stimulates the imagination with the nature spirits. And Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. That's more than a white lie, but it's a white lie. Your Santa Claus won't put a Christmas stocking unless you go to sleep. Okay. The parents hardly going to receive terrible karma for that. But the more a lie is intended, the more will be the karmic download. And Steiner made it very clear in many lectures that one of the worst spiritual crimes is telling lies intentionally. Obviously, a lie is intentional. Well, one can tell a lie out of weakness. One can tell a lie. I sent you the email when I'm about to send it. Yes, it's a lie, but I'm not going to go to prison for that. But then there are lies where you deliberately want to do someone down for your own power and position. And if these people would only understand what a bed of mire they're making for themselves in the afterlife and any other lives, they would recoil from horror, from deliberately telling lies.
So there is a gradation to how karma works.
That's right. I mean, relativity applies everywhere. So why we tell a lie is the motive behind the lie, either to protect our backsides or to gain something, control and power over someone else.
Or some people feel they don't want to hurt somebody, or they feel like it might be misinterpreted.
That I can personally relate to, Emmy. I've been in that situation, and now genuinely, you don't want to hurt them, so you try and deflect the conversation and tell a semi-white lie and hope that they pick up on it, rather than just coming out with the truth. Yes, that's a difficult one. But if your motive is really not to hurt someone, then surely that lie will not rebound on you in the way that if you said it deliberately to hurt them. So there's so many gradations.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the one I struggle with myself.
Yeah. And people can also lie to themselves about what they feel is the truth.
Yes, to thine own self be true. Absolutely, be true to yourself first. If you're true to yourself, you can't lie to anyone else.
Yes, getting honest with ourselves.
Mm.
Would you say that karma is an evolution of our own consciousness?
Yes, it is an evolution of the way our consciousness unfolds through our various bodies and our various incarnations, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that applies to humanity, of course. There is also, of course, the consciousness of the planet.
How does karma relate to time?
Excellent question. What happens, and here I'm quoting Paul Brunton, I've discussed it with Brunton's son, actually, who I had the great privilege and honor to know for a long time. Actually, what happens to you does not happen in time, but it works out for you because you are in time. Because we live in this dual time-bound universe, it works out for you in time, but the action is instantaneous. So to think of a most simplistic example, if I have something to eat for dinner and I feel unwell at 3 o'clock in the morning, the indigestion didn't start at 3 in the morning. It happened instantly, but it worked out in time because I'm in time. And equally, if we eat healthily, if we eat good quality organic vegetarian or whatever food, you don't suddenly become strong, but it works out through you in time, even though the effects of the good food are out of time, but it's working through you in time. So time and karma are very deep and profound subjects to dwell on.
Mm-hmm.
And it could work out in time over many lifetimes. If you hurt someone or love someone, and there is that unfulfilled thing that needs to be resolved, when you two come together after 2 incarnations or whatever, that is the working out over time, even though the cause was put in action instantaneously.
I know we spoke of this earlier. It makes me think of the song by the Indigo Girls that has the line in there of, how long till my soul gets it right?
How long till my soul gets it right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the soul is always approaching a never-ending summit. How boring to get it right. Isn't it wonderful never to get it right? So one's constantly approaching. One isn't struggling, striving, but one's polishing that diamond to make it reflect that much more clearly and beautifully. There's no such thing as playing a piece of music perfectly. There are many nuances to perfection and getting it right.
Some do believe that once we go through this wheel of karma and we learn the lessons we're meant to learn, which I also want to talk with you a little bit about who determines those lessons. Is it us? Or I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that, that we then don't have to reincarnate, or we can choose to either come back here or perhaps go somewhere else.
Yeah, that is the great teaching of the Bodhisattva, which is not only a Buddhist teaching, but one finds it in the other religions, but the Buddhist teaching is the most clear, that when the personal self is so aligned to the higher self, then all karma has been, so to speak, exhausted, then one can either take on the path of the Pratyeka Buddha and the Nirmanakaya and others. I'll explain that. Now, the Pratyeka Buddha is the higher being who chooses to enjoy the fruits of nirvana. And nirvana doesn't mean annihilation, far from it. The word nir and vana means extinguishing the flame, vana, the flame. Nir is annihilating. So what are we extinguishing? The flame of sentient existence, not wanting sentient existence. And what draws us into incarnation is tanha and trishna, the desire for sentient existence, for familiar things we knew. So the Pratyeka Buddha has earned that, so he can, I say he, obviously, can choose not to take on sentient existence. So it's rather like a person who's worked as an engineer, whatever, and fulfilled everything, and then he is entitled to retire and lie by the pool and enjoy his retirement. He's earned that retirement. So you can call it selfish if you like, but he's earned it. The other kind of engineer can say, I'll lie by the pool one day a year, but I will help my colleagues on the way up as I was helped. That is the Nirmanakaya. So the Nirmanakaya is not really a being. It is a vesture that is taken on by a higher being so that that higher being can be in touch with humanity in order to help elevate the consciousness of humanity. So the Nirmanakaya is in touch with humanity at all levels other than the physical, the etheric and higher levels. The purpose being to help humanity. So he is renounced nirvana. The other great beings are known as the Sambhogakaya and the Dharmakaya. Now, the Dharmakaya is so far advanced that he has crossed the wheel of birth. So the Dharmakaya will only incarnate in another round, when I say round, another incarnation of planet Earth, so to speak. But, I mean, let's not worry about the Dharmakaya. We've got enough on planet Earth. And I would certainly say the Nirmanakaya evidence can be seen just insofar as we would have blown up our planet many times with all the stupidities we've done, but somehow we haven't.
Well, some say that the extraterrestrials are helping us, Eddie.
Yeah, but look, extraterrestrials is one way of putting it. The human mind clothes the abstract in terms of the mental clothing. So the wonderful Sanskrit word is Kriya Shakti, the image-making power of the mind. So if I lived in the 17th century, I wouldn't talk of extraterrestrials. I would use another word. Because I now see spacemen in spacesuits, I say aliens come in spacesuits. So I'm clothing the naked truth with my mental imagery. So if the aliens are the mental clothing that people put on, when they have an inner impulse, when they have an inner intuition, but they can't express it other than in the language we have around us. But the other extraterrestrials, by the way, are known as the Manasaputras, who in prehistory, during the third root race, the Lemurian root race, were those higher august beings who awakened the latent mind principle of the then humanity. So you can call a Nirmanakaya an alien, but I would prefer to say the Nirmanakaya is an august being who dons the luminous vesture in order to stay in touch with humanity And you would not see a Nirmanakaya, you would not see such a being with your physical eyes unless you were highly evolved. So when you see aliens, just be a bit scientific and question what you're seeing. What you're seeing is your mental clothing, your mental imagery that you're putting on something that you have a vague intuition of.
What role does intuition play with our karma?
Everything. Because intuition cuts through the intellectual mind, but very few people have that quality now. Intuition is supposed to be the next sense that we are due to develop. So having developed the mind principle and the intellectual principle, intuition is the upgrade from that, where we're not using the mind conceptually with the mind, we are perceptually. Intuition is that direct perception.
Yeah.
So one might say that it is one's karmic heirloom to develop intuition as part of our growth.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, something we are gifted towards, that our karma in general is moving in that direction.
Yeah.
We can either quicken that or we can follow the general course of humanity.
So who is orchestrating all of this, Eddie, this wheel of karma?
No one. Who is orchestrating gravity?
Mm-hmm.
It is really the ultimate divine intelligence that works through adjustment and equilibrium. This is the problem a lot of scientists have with Newton's great saying that the planets and stars move until they require an adjustment. And the minute you say adjustment, they think, oh, well, you've got a God adjusting it. So as in a chemical reaction, when I said Le Chatelier's principle, if you disturb that chemical system and it moves to another, who is moving it? Well, it's within the system. It's self-actualizing, not an external something.
And we are all a part of that.
We most certainly are. Yes, we are a part of that, definitely. And that is very, very important to realize. We are a part of that. And the worst thing we can do is to regard ourselves as superior to someone else. So self-righteousness is asking for a bed of mire or a bed of nails, whichever you prefer, but a horrible bed anyway. Because you really have to understand that in the deeper sense, you are your brother, you are sister, you are part of humanity. And if you despise, as it says in Light on the Path, and I'm paraphrasing, if you've got a lovely silk suit and a beautiful bow tie, and you despise the man with the dirty, moth-eaten overcoat, one day you might be thankful for that overcoat when you're dying of hypothermia. You might be thankful for that dirty overcoat being flung over your shoulders. So self-righteousness is asking for trouble, and also asking for trouble is to say, I'm doing this in order to sow good karma. So you don't commit murder, you don't commit adultery or thief because you want good karma, far from it. You don't do these things because it's right not to do so. It's right not to do so. But if you don't thieve because you're going to sow good karma, good luck to you. That lovely saying, he who tries to plant the beautiful flower may plant the giant weed. So desire no karma for yourself. Just do good because it's right.
What is the web of karma and how can we escape it?
The web of karma is the way we are entangled with other people, our family, our nation, and the society we live in. And in the truest sense, karma has to be collective. If I'm living in a block of flats and throw rubbish out of my window, I'm affecting everyone else. And everyone else is so affected. But the way you can't escape it so much as to realize you are part of that web, but not to be entangled by it.
It makes me think of near-death experiencers, and of course, there are commonalities among those experiences. Not everybody has the same features, but among those that are common, people can describe having the life review, where sometimes people refer to it as having your life flash before your eyes, but they're actually experiencing moments of their lives, and they also experience moments of their lives and how, from other people's perspective, how they experienced it. And so that implies that we are, as you have suggested several times here in our conversation today, interconnected with each other deeply, more deeply than we really realize here as humans.
Definitely, the life review is the inside-out experience, where you experience on yourself what you've done to others, well, good and bad, of course, so-called good and so-called bad. So that life review is a vital part of the near-death experience. It is not denied, but it's more difficult when one dies murdered, of course, or in war or in violent circumstances.
Eddie, is there anything else you want to share today, knowing that this is a vast topic and we certainly can't cover all of it in one conversation, about understanding your karma?
Well, people say, how do I deal with it? You have the Nobel scientist, the scientist who says, I did all the work, he pinched my result, and he got the Nobel Prize. I mean, that has happened. You have the case of the wonderful lady in Iran, Mahsa Amani. Yeah, Maha Amani. Amini, something like that. Yeah, the young Kurdish woman who was arrested by the so-called morality police and died in hospital thanks to police brutality. Now, was it the karma of this courageous woman to speak out in Iran's moment of truth, which has really engaged a lot of other young women to come forward and be a bit more courageous? Now, one may well ask, was it part of her life's destiny to suffer and be brutalized in order to help her nation? So that's part of the web of karma. But in terms of, as an individual, to loosen or lighten one's karma, I would really say try and get out of duality. Try and get out of, as far as possible, I like this, I don't like that. I like her, I don't like him. It's this constant flip-flop, flip-flop. In other words, live in the eternal. So in Light on the Path, there is the injunction that there is no cure, really, for desire, no cure for the love of reward, and no cure for the longing of misery and all of that, save setting one's eyes on that which is beyond sight and one's ears which is beyond sound. In other words, living in the eternal, which sounds easy, of course, but not getting caught up in duality, in the constant flip-flopping of duality. With that, to realize that the more one refines oneself, the more we uplift humanity, because we are part of humanity. And this is the Christ's beautiful words, isn't it? That the more one does unto the least one of you, the more you do to me. Words to that effect. That the more you uplift yourself, even to a small extent, you will uplift everyone else. The more you drive sensibly and courteously in a traffic jam, the better the jam will be, because you're the courteous one, and the traffic jam will be better for your good driving. But if you start raging around, the traffic jam will only get worse. So the more one refines oneself, the more we refine humanity, which is not to sound in any way superior.
Mm-hmm. But in an authentic way.
Of course, absolutely, yes. The more one refines oneself as part of one's natural evolutionary process, and this might come back to our earlier conversation, is why are there so many talented musicians now out of Korea and China and Japan, whereas previously they were Germany, Spain, Italy? Because all of these great artists are refining themselves and thereby providing that impulse to other countries to do the same.
When you speak of non-duality, I think it can be a little tricky to understand that in the context that karma is often referred to as being either good or bad, doing something that's either good or bad.
No, not at all. No. Good or bad are words we put on it. And of course, when one is suffering, it's bad. But now, many people who are suffering will say, victim mentality, will blame them. My karma, look what my parents did to me, look what so-and-so. Tell me, Emmy, how many billionaires will say, when they have their billions, why am I a victim of this? They will never say, why am I being rewarded? Oh no, I deserve it. So these are the tricks we play with our mind. When we're suffering, it's bad. But when it's good, we deserve it. Find me a billionaire who questions his karma. It's my right.
Some would probably say they worked hard for it.
They might say it, but we can say anything.
Yeah. Eddie, this has been a delightful conversation. Again, you've given us all a lot to think about. It's always a joy to talk with you, and you have so much rich knowledge to share with us to help us all with our karma. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Emmy. It's been my pleasure and a delight as well. And nearly 2 hours has flown by, and we were talking about time, weren't we? And time is entirely relative. So it's been my honor as well, and I really mean that. And thank you so much.
My pleasure, Eddie.
Great pleasure.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here. Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy.